The town of Elmsworth was the kind of place where life moved in predictable rhythms. Small houses lined the narrow streets, their chipped paint and leaning fences speaking more of endurance than elegance. To the outside eye, it was ordinary, quiet, almost invisible on the map. But for Maya, it was more than just another small town. It was supposed to be the start of her second chance. She had arrived 6 months earlier, carrying little more than a worn suitcase and the weight of memories she seldom spoke of. At 27, Maya's life had already unraveled more than once. Behind her were years of whispers, slammed doors, and the bruises that she always explained away. She had crossed state lines with nothing but a fragile determination that she would not let her past define her. Yet even here, in Elmsworth's silence, shadows trailed her. Her mornings followed a routine. She would wake before sunrise, make tea in the small kitchen of her rented apartment, and sit by the window overlooking the empty street. The ritual was less about comfort and more about grounding, a way to remind herself she was still here, still breathing. The steam against her face felt like proof of life. Maya had taken a job at a local bookstore, a quiet place filled with dusty shelves and the faint smell of old paper. The owner, Mrs. Callahan, a kindly woman in her 60s, had asked no questions when Maya applied. Perhaps she saw the guarded look in her eyes, the way she hesitated before giving her last name. Maya appreciated the silence, the absence of pity. It allowed her to exist without explanation. On the surface, her days blended together like pages in an old diary. She stocked shelves, swept the wooden floors, and helped the occasional customer looking for forgotten classics. Yet, beneath the surface, her mind rarely rested. At night, when the town settled into sleep, the memories returned. Raised voices, footsteps echoing in hallways, the tightening grip around her wrist. Even now, hundreds of miles away, she sometimes startled at the sound of heavy boots outside her door. Still, she clung to hope. She told herself that here, maybe, she could build something different. Sometimes she even smiled at the thought of it. She imagined a life where laughter wasn't dangerous, where love didn't come with bruises, where home was safety and not a cage. One crisp autumn evening, Maya walked home from the bookstore as the street lamps flickered to life. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves. She pulled her scarf tighter, savoring the cool air against her skin. Passing neighbors nodded politely, unaware of the storm she carried inside. To them, she was just the quiet girl who rented the apartment above the laundromat. To herself, she was still learning how to breathe again. But even in this fragile calm, an unease lingered. Maya noticed the way her phone sometimes lit up with unknown numbers. The way footsteps occasionally echoed behind her on dark streets, though no one was ever there when she turned. Once, she found her apartment door unlocked, though she was sure she had secured it. She told herself it was nerves, nothing more than scars playing tricks on her. Yet deep down, she knew scars had a way of warning before the pain returned. One evening, as she closed the bookstore, Mrs. Callahan placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You look tired, dear. Take care of yourself." Maya forced a smile, her voice soft. "I will. Thank you." It was the kind of exchange that felt ordinary, but for Maya, every word carried weight. Tired wasn't just exhaustion. It was the bone-deep weariness of someone who had spent too long surviving instead of living. Elmsworth's quiet nights seemed endless, but peace built on fear was fragile. And though Maya couldn't see it yet, the path that she had taken, the hope she clung to, was already leading her into the orbit of someone who would change everything. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the clouds pressed low and the streets of Elmsworth glistened with uneven reflections. Maya had just finished her shift at the bookstore, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck as she hurried across the square. That's when she first noticed him, leaning casually against a cafe window, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady. Daniel. At first glance, he seemed almost too perfect for this quiet town. Tall, with sharp features, softened by an easy smile, he looked like someone who belonged to another world entirely. When he caught Maya's eyes, he didn't look away like most strangers did. Instead, he held her gaze, as though he recognized something in her, a quiet sorrow, a vulnerability tucked beneath layers of restraint. "Do you always rush past without stopping for coffee?" His voice was warm, disarming. Maya hesitated, unsure why she didn't just keep walking. Maybe it was the storm in her head meeting the calm in his tone, or maybe it was that she hadn't heard genuine interest directed at her in so long. Against her better judgment, she offered a small smile. "Maybe I should stop today." Inside the cafe, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon wrapped around them. They talked over steaming cups, the rain tapping the windows like a metronome. Daniel spoke easily, his words flowing with practiced charm. He told her about his travels, the businesses he had dabbled in, the adventures he claimed to have chased. To Maya, who had lived in shadows for too long, his stories were intoxicating, an invitation into a life bigger than her own. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel became a presence she could not ignore. He started showing up outside the bookstore, walking her home, slipping small gifts into her hands. Flowers, books, trinkets he said reminded him of her. Each gesture felt like sunlight breaking through a heavy sky. She told herself it was safe to let him in, that she deserved something good after everything she had endured. But there were moments, small ones, that unsettled her. The way his eyes lingered too long, studying her as though she were a puzzle he intended to solve. The sharp edge in his voice when a waiter's glance lingered on her a second too long. The possessive way his hand tightened around hers when they walked through crowded streets. Still, Maya brushed these feelings aside. She wanted so badly to believe in him, to believe in the possibility that not every man was a ghost from her past. Daniel knew exactly what to say to soothe her doubts. When she grew quiet, he whispered promises. "You'll never have to be afraid again. I'll take care of you." His words were both a balm and a chain. One evening after dinner at a dimly lit restaurant, Daniel leaned closer across the table. His eyes glinted under the candlelight. "You've been through enough," he said softly. "Let me be the one who gives you the life you deserve." Her chest tightened. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw something flicker behind his smile, something darker, harder. But then he reached for her hand, and the warmth of his touch silenced the unease rising in her. Back in her apartment that night, Maya sat by the window, watching the rain blur the street lamps. Daniel's words echoed in her head. "Let me be the one." A part of her wanted to surrender fully to that promise, to allow herself to be carried into the safety he painted with such conviction. Yet another part, the part that remembered doors slamming and fists tightening, whispered caution. She pulled her blanket tighter and closed her eyes, convincing herself that this time would be different, that Daniel was different. But the shadows knew better. Because even as Maya clung to fragile hope, Daniel was already weaving threads of control, threads so fine they felt like love, but strong enough to bind, and soon those threads would tighten. The first fight came quietly, like a hairline fracture spreading across glass. Maya could not even remember what sparked it, something about her leaving the bookstore too late, or maybe about her speaking to the landlord without telling Daniel. What she remembered was the way his voice shifted, sharp, clipped, carrying a weight that pressed against her chest. "You don't understand how much I care," Daniel had said, his hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly the wood creaked. "If you just listen, if you just trust me, none of this would happen." Maya nodded, her throat dry. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to keep the peace. Yet the image of his face twisted with anger stayed with her long after his words softened into apologies. Soon, the arguments came more often. Neighbors in the narrow apartment hallways began to hear muffled voices rising behind Maya's door, her quiet pleas drowned out by Daniel's sharper tone. At first, people assumed it was the normal turbulence of couples living together. But as nights stretched longer and the slams of doors echoed louder, whispers began to drift through the building. Maya felt those whispers in the way her neighbor's eyes lingered on her, curious but unwilling to intrude. She hid her bruises with long sleeves, tugging fabric down over her wrists even on warm afternoons. At the bookstore, she kept her scarf wrapped tightly, claiming she had caught a chill. Her practiced smile became armor, one she wore until her cheeks ached. Her friends noticed the change, too. Invitations for coffee went unanswered. Text messages piled up, unopened. When she finally met Lena, a colleague from work, for a quick drink, Maya's laughter felt brittle, rehearsed. Lena reached across the table, her brow furrowed. "Maya, are you okay? You look tired, different." Maya's hand instinctively brushed her sleeve, covering the fading bruise beneath. She forced a smile. "I'm fine. Really. Daniel's just protective. He worries too much." Protective. That was the word Daniel had taught her to use. He wrapped his control in the language of care. When she tried to see friends, he reminded her of how they never truly understood her. When she longed to call her sister back in India, he told her the time difference would only bring distance, not comfort. "They don't care about you the way I do," Daniel whispered late one night, his hand cupping her cheek, his eyes burning with intensity. "They'll judge you. They'll abandon you. I'm the only one who'll stay." In her heart, Maya felt the truth slipping away. Every time she tried to push back, Daniel found a way to twist her doubts into guilt. If she raised her voice, he accused her of not appreciating his love. If she cried, he pulled her close, whispering apologies until her tears blurred into silence. Each cycle left her weaker, more convinced that maybe he was right, that maybe she had no one else. Her apartment, once a space of fragile freedom, now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to listen, carrying echoes of their arguments long after the words ended. At night, Maya sat by the window, staring at the reflection of her face in the glass. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, eyes dimmed, shoulders hunched, a ghost of the girl who once dreamed of rebuilding her life. The cracks were spreading, though she tried desperately to smooth them over. She told herself things would get better, that love required sacrifice, that bruises were just accidents, that isolation was protection. But deep down she knew the mirror would not hold forever. And when it finally shattered, the pieces would cut deeper than she could imagine. The arguments left echoes long after Daniel's voice had gone quiet. At night, when the building slept and the city's hum softened into silence, Maya reached for her notebook. It was hidden in the bottom drawer beneath folded scarves, her secret confessional, her only refuge. Her handwriting trembled across the page, spilling words she could never say aloud. "I don't know who I am anymore. I smile when I want to scream. I tell myself he loves me, but why does love leave bruises?" She never intended to send these letters. They were addressed to no one and everyone, sometimes to her sister, sometimes to her past self, sometimes to a faceless future where she was free. Each page was soaked in contradictions, fear and hope, shame and yearning, love and dread. By day, Maya played the role Daniel expected, the devoted partner, pliant and soft-spoken. But in the dark, her pen scratched against the paper like a pulse. She confessed her guilt for staying, her terror of leaving. She wondered if her silence made her complicit, if her love for him was nothing more than a prison she had built herself. "I keep telling myself tomorrow will be different," she wrote one night, tears blurring the ink. "But tomorrow always feels the same. His eyes follow me, even when he smiles." I don't know how much longer I can pretend. The pages became her mirror, reflecting the fractures she tried to hide from the world. She wrote of the bruises beneath her sleeves, of the way Daniel's words wrapped tighter than his hands. She confessed her dread of what might happen if she defied him too openly. Sometimes her writing turned desperate. If anything happens to me, let this be known. I wanted to live. I wanted to be free. But I was too afraid to break away. There were nights when she stopped mid-sentence, convinced she had heard footsteps outside the door. Her heart would pound until she realized it was only Tide. Her neighbor's cat knocking over a bottle, or the pipes groaning in the walls. Still, she would close the notebook quickly, shoving it back beneath the scarves, terrified Daniel might find it. For Maya, the journal was both salvation and torment. It gave her voice in a world where silence was demanded, but every word carried the weight of betrayal if discovered. Writing was her rebellion, small and secret, a flicker of selfhood that Daniel had not yet extinguished. The entries grew darker as weeks passed. Sometimes I think about leaving while he sleeps. I imagine walking into the night with nothing but my bag. But where would I go? Who would believe me? Her fears spilled across every page, but so did a quiet resilience. Beneath the despair lingered a longing to survive, to reclaim the girl who once dreamed of a new beginning. Yet each time she closed the notebook, reality swallowed her again. The last entry of that month ended abruptly. He's watching me more closely now. Even when I write, I feel his shadow. I don't know how much longer I can hide this. Maya tucked the notebook deeper into the drawer, her fingers trembling. Outside, the night pressed against the window, heavy and endless. She blew out the candle, her words swallowed by darkness. What she didn't know was that secrets written in the dark never stay hidden forever. The journal entry ended unfinished, but reality completed what Maya had feared. It happened on a night like so many others. Dinner half-eaten, silence heavy, Daniel's gaze burning into her skin. A single comment, small and careless, ignited him. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the plates. Words, sharp as glass, flew across the room. She tried to calm him, voice trembling, but the storm was already rising. When his hand struck her, the sound echoed louder than the impact itself. Maya froze, her cheek stinging, her breath shallow. For a heartbeat, she thought he might stop. Instead, his rage swelled, twisting into shouts, accusations, the venom of control disguised as love. The fragile dam inside her broke. With shaking hands, she grabbed her jacket, torn at the sleeve where his grip had pulled too hard, and her phone, slipping past him before he could block her. The door slammed behind her as she ran into the night. The streets blurred in her vision, neon lights smearing with tears. Her footsteps echoed against the pavement, frantic, uneven. Every sound, a car door slamming, footsteps from strangers, felt like Daniel following close behind. She didn't stop until her lungs burned, until the world narrowed into survival. Her trembling fingers scrolled through her contacts until she landed on a name she hadn't dialed in months. Priya. Her best friend, the one she had slowly pushed away at Daniel's insistence. The phone rang, and when Priya's familiar voice answered, Maya could no longer contain the sobs. Through gasps and broken words, she confessed what she had hidden, the bruises, the fear, the nights of silence, the journal no one had seen. Priya listened, her own voice tight with both grief and urgency. Maya, you have to report him. Please. This isn't love. It's a prison. You don't have to go back. For a moment, Maya felt the pull of freedom in those words. She pictured herself walking into a police station, telling her truth, stepping into daylight unafraid. She wanted to believe she could. But then came the flood of doubt. What if no one believed her? What if Daniel found out? What if leaving meant being truly alone? I can't, she whispered, the word cracking under the weight of shame. You don't understand. He needs me. And if I leave, I don't know who I am without him. Priya's voice grew desperate. Maya, he will destroy you if you stay. Please, don't let fear chain you. But fear was already wrapped tight around her heart. Love, twisted and poisoned, still whispered that Daniel's apologies might come, that his arms might soften again, that she could fix what was broken. She hated herself for believing it, but the longing was there all the same. She sat on a park bench, clutching her phone like a lifeline, staring into the shadows of the trees. The night was cold, her jacket barely holding against the wind. For the first time in years, she was outside without him, and yet she felt his shadow everywhere. Minutes stretched into hours. Priya begged her to come over, but Maya shook her head even though no one could see. Guilt gnawed at her. Guilt for staying, guilt for leaving, guilt for not being strong enough to do either. When the sky began to lighten at the edges, Maya rose slowly. Her body ached, her face still sore, but her feet carried her back toward the apartment. Each step felt heavier, as though chains dragged behind her. Priya's last words echoed in her ears. One day, it will be too late. Maya's hand trembled as she fit the key into the lock. On the other side waited Daniel, his apologies, his fury, or both. Her journal was hidden inside, her secrets buried in ink, her hope pressed thin between pages. She turned the key, heart pounding, and stepped back into the shadows she had just escaped. What she didn't yet realize was that fleeing once had marked a line Daniel would never forgive. And in crossing back over it, Maya's story hurtled toward the edge of no return. The morning after her return was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel spoke little, his silence heavier than any outburst. Maya moved cautiously, her heart tight with the memory of Priya's words. She told herself she would be careful, that she would try harder, that maybe peace could still exist. But something had shifted. Daniel's eyes lingered too long, watching, calculating. For several days, Maya seemed to disappear inside herself. She stopped calling Priya, stopped writing in her journal. Neighbors saw her less often. The blinds stayed shut, the balcony door remained locked, and the once faint sound of music or television inside the apartment was gone. Then, one night, the quiet broke. A neighbor later told police that he had been jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering. Another swore she heard a woman's voice screaming, brief, cut off sharply. A thud followed, heavy enough to echo through the thin walls, then silence. No one dared knock on the door. Everyone waited for morning, telling themselves it was just another fight, just another couple in trouble. By dawn, Maya was gone. Her apartment was discovered in disarray. A lamp lay smashed on the floor, shards scattered like frozen lightning. One of her suitcases sat half-packed near the bed, clothes folded neatly, as though she had been preparing to leave. Another was empty, lying open with nothing inside. Her phone was missing, but her journal remained tucked beneath the mattress, pages filled with fears no one had yet read. The police entered cautiously, documenting every corner. To some officers, it looked like a woman fleeing. Bags ready, no forced entry, no signs of struggle beyond the broken lamp. To others, the silence felt staged, the neatness unsettling. Why pack only one suitcase halfway? Why leave behind personal treasures she never traveled without? The neighbors' testimonies fueled both sides. Yes, there had been, in screams. Yes, there had been a crash. But hadn't they also seen Maya walking with her head down, distant, as if planning to vanish? Hadn't she once spoken of wanting to start over far away? Skepticism hung in the air. Was this a crime or a disappearance of choice? The case became official. Maya Patel, missing. Her name joined the growing list of women reported gone, but not yet confirmed victims. Flyers went up, bearing her photograph, her smile frozen in time. Priya wept when questioned, begging officers to look closer at Daniel, to believe her when she said Maya would never leave without telling someone. Daniel's statement was calm, almost too calm. He told police Maya had been unstable, prone to dramatic outbursts, talking often about running away. He painted himself as patient, long-suffering, a man abandoned by a troubled woman. When asked about the smashed lamp, he shrugged. She was angry. Things break when emotions run high. Behind his composure, though, some detectives sensed a flicker, something cold in his eyes, something that didn't fit the grieving partner he pretended to be. Still, without a body, without blood, without undeniable proof, suspicion hovered without landing. The town buzzed with rumors. Some said she had finally escaped, boarding a bus or a train to a new life where Daniel couldn't follow. Others whispered darker theories, that she lay somewhere unmarked, her voice silenced forever. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, but no one more than Priya. She clutched the copy of Maya's missing person flyer, her fingers trembling, knowing in her bones that her friend hadn't simply walked away. As weeks turned into months, the mystery only deepened. Maya's name became a question, her absence a wound no one could close. The fragile hope that she had left by choice flickered, but the shadows of violence loomed larger. And in the silence that followed, Daniel's mask began to crack. The days following Maya's disappearance marked a decisive shift in the investigation. Initial uncertainty gave way to mounting suspicion as detectives began scrutinizing Daniel's life more closely. His calm demeanor in interviews had seemed rehearsed, but it was the cold precision in his words that drew attention. When asked about Maya's state of mind, he reiterated the same narrative. She was unstable, she wanted to leave, she had spoken of vanishing before. Yet something about the consistency of his story felt calculated. The first break came through Maya's bank records. Investigators discovered irregular withdrawals from her savings account, large sums, systematically drained over the course of several months. Transfers had been redirected into joint accounts Daniel controlled. The pattern suggested deliberate financial manipulation, not impulsive spending. Maya, once careful with money, had quietly been stripped of her independence. What appeared at first to be a partnership was revealed as financial entrapment. Detectives followed the trail further. Credit cards in her name had been maxed out on luxury items she never owned. Bills stacked under her identity suggested mounting debts, leaving the impression of recklessness. Yet receipts showed the purchases were consistent with Daniel's lifestyle: watches, electronics, fine dining. It became clear he had not only drained her resources, but also left her with liabilities she never consented to. When Priya was called in for questioning again, she brought fragments of conversations she had long carried with unease. Maya had confessed late-night fears, Daniel watching her too closely, monitoring her phone, controlling her accounts. "He makes me feel like I don't exist without him," she had once whispered. Priya's voice cracked as she relayed these words to detectives. Each fragment of fear added weight to the growing case against him. Friends from work spoke of Maya's sudden withdrawal from social life. She had once been vibrant, eager to plan small gatherings, but gradually she became a shadow, turning down invitations, making excuses, always wary of being away too long. One colleague recalled the subtle bruises she tried to conceal beneath long sleeves, and the way she flinched when asked if everything was all right. The media seized upon the story. Headlines painted Maya in conflicting tones. Some outlets cast her as a tragic figure, an educated young woman whose trust had been exploited. Others framed her as reckless, suggesting she had chosen a dangerous man despite warning signs. Talk shows debated her character rather than her circumstances, as though her disappearance were a morality tale rather than a crime. This distortion of narrative blurred public judgment. To one side, she was a victim of coercion and control, To another, she was complicit in her own downfall. The nuance of her silent suffering was lost in the noise. Yet through the cacophony, a few voices began to demand accountability. Voices that pointed to Daniel's financial exploitation as clear evidence of intent. Detectives themselves faced a delicate balance. Without a body or direct evidence of violence, charges of foul play remained tenuous. Yet the financial records, the testimonies, and the neighbors' accounts of that fateful night painted a portrait of escalating abuse. Whispers of betrayal, once confined to private conversations, had become threads weaving into a public reckoning. Daniel, meanwhile, grew increasingly defensive. He denied wrongdoing, insisting the financial decisions had been mutual. "She wanted me to manage things," he claimed, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. He accused her friends of jealousy, of inventing stories to destroy his reputation. His attempts at control now shifted from Maya to the narrative itself, seeking to bend perception in his favor. Yet beneath the surface, the investigation had momentum. Detectives gathered every statement, every record, every inconsistency. Each piece was small, but together they suggested something larger. Betrayal not only of trust, but of life itself. As the case expanded, the weight of evidence pressed toward a pivotal moment. The whispers had grown louder, circling Daniel like shadows waiting to converge, and soon the reckoning would move from whispers into the courtroom. The whispers of betrayal had barely settled into the fabric of the town when a chilling discovery tore through the silence. It was an early morning in late autumn, the sky painted in muted grays, when a jogger following the river trail stopped short. At first it looked like driftwood caught in the reeds, pale and unmoving. But as the mist lifted, the outline became undeniable, a body tangled against the rocks at the river's bend. The jogger's scream echoed across the empty bank, breaking the calm. Within hours, the scene swarmed with police, crime scene tape cutting through the tall grass like a scar. Officers moved carefully, their gloves slick with morning dew as they waded into the shallows. When they brought her to shore, the weight of what they carried settled heavy in the air. The woman's face was swollen, her hair matted with mud and water, but in her clenched hand lay a fragile clue, a delicate silver necklace. Its chain was snapped, the charm pressed deep into her palm as though held with final, desperate strength. Priya, called to identify, collapsed at the sight. "It's hers," she whispered, fingers trembling. "That necklace was Maya's." The confirmation shattered what little hope remained. Maya had not vanished into the night willingly. She had not fled to start over elsewhere. Her story had ended in the river, her final moments written in silence beneath the current. The town, already restless with speculation, erupted in grief and rage. Candles appeared on street corners, photographs of Maya taped to lampposts and cafe windows. Friends who had doubted their instincts now spoke of guilt, wondering if one more call, one more knock at her door, might have saved her. Yet their sorrow quickly mingled with fury directed at Daniel, whose shadow loomed larger with every detail uncovered. The autopsy deepened that fury. Medical examiners revealed signs of prolonged abuse, fractures in various stages of healing, deep bruises on her arms and ribs, scars hidden beneath layers of skin. The pattern spoke of a cycle: control, violence, reconciliation, and silence. Maya's death had been the culmination of years of torment, not a sudden tragedy. The final cause was blunt force trauma, delivered before her body was discarded into the river's cold embrace. Detectives released little to the press, but whispers carried the truth anyway. Daniel was no longer just a figure of suspicion. He was painted in the public eye as a predator who had orchestrated her downfall piece by piece. The financial betrayal, the isolation, the bruises, all now pointed to the riverbank as the inevitable conclusion. Daniel maintained his innocence. He appeared on local news, eyes glistening with rehearsed sorrow. "I loved Maya," he insisted, voice steady but hollow. "She was troubled. but I would never hurt her. Yet the town no longer believed his words. Outside the police station, crowds gathered, demanding justice, their chants filling the night air with a collective anger that could not be silenced. For Priya, the loss cut deeper than anger. She replayed every conversation, every late-night confession Maya had shared. "I should have forced her to leave him," she sobbed in one interview, her voice breaking. "I should have done more." Her guilt became a mirror for many who had glimpsed Maya's suffering, but had not intervened fully, choosing silence over confrontation. The whispers of betrayal had barely settled into the fabric of the town when a chilling discovery tore through the silence. It was an early morning in late autumn, the sky painted in muted grays, when a jogger following the river trail stopped short. At first it looked like driftwood caught in the reeds, pale and unmoving. But as the mist lifted, the outline became undeniable. A body tangled against the rocks at the river's bend. The jogger's scream echoed across the empty bank, breaking the calm. Within hours, the scene swarmed with police, crime scene tape cutting through the tall grass like a scar. Officers moved carefully, their gloves slick with morning dew as they waded into the shallows. When they brought her to shore, the weight of what they carried settled heavy in the air. The woman's face was swollen, her hair matted with mud and water, but in her clenched hand lay a fragile clue, a delicate silver necklace. Its chain was snapped, the charm pressed deep into her palm as though held with final, desperate strength. Priya, called to identify, collapsed at the sight. "It's hers," she whispered, fingers trembling. That necklace was Maya's. The confirmation shattered what little hope remained. Maya had not vanished into the night willingly. She had not fled to start over elsewhere. Her story had ended in the river, her final moments written in silence beneath the current. The town, already restless with speculation, erupted in grief and rage. Candles appeared on street corners, photographs of Maya taped to lampposts and cafe windows. Friends who had doubted their instincts now spoke of guilt, wondering if one more call, one more knock at her door, might have saved her. Yet their sorrow quickly mingled with fury directed at Daniel, whose shadow loomed larger with every detail uncovered. The autopsy deepened that fury. Medical examiners revealed signs of prolonged abuse, fractures in various stages of healing, deep bruises on her arms and ribs, scars hidden beneath layers of ski. The pattern spoke of a cycle: control, violence, reconciliation, and silence. Maya's death had been the culmination of years of torment, not a sudden tragedy. The final cause was blunt force trauma, delivered before her body was discarded into the river's cold embrace. Detectives released little to the press, but whispers carried the truth anyway. Daniel was no longer just a figure of suspicion. He was painted in the public eye as a predator who had orchestrated her downfall piece by piece. The financial betrayal, the isolation, the bruises, all now pointed to the riverbank as the inevitable conclusion. Daniel maintained his innocence. He appeared on local news, eyes glistening with rehearsed sorrow. "I loved Maya," he insisted, voice steady but hollow. "She was troubled, but I would never hurt her." Yet the town no longer believed his words. Outside the police station, crowds gathered, demanding justice, their chants filling the night air with a collective anger that could not be silenced. For Priya, the loss cut deeper than anger. She replayed every conversation, every late-night confession Maya had shared. "I should have forced her to leave him," she sobbed in one interview, her voice breaking. "I should have done more." Her guilt became a mirror for many who had glimpsed Maya's suffering, but had not intervened fully, choosing silence over confrontation. The necklace, small, silver, and broken, became a symbol. Journalists photographed it under sterile lights, the image appearing in newspapers with headlines that asked the same question. How had no one saved her? The charm once meant love. Now it carried only loss. As the investigation shifted, the whispers of betrayal that had haunted the town transformed into a louder cry for justice. The river had given up its secret, but in doing so, it demanded reckoning. And as Daniel prepared to face what lay ahead, the cast. He moved from the shadows of suspicion into the harsh light of the courtroom. Daniel's mask began to crack the moment Maya's body was pulled from the river. For weeks, he had clung to a role he had crafted so carefully. The grieving partner, the man who claimed to have loved her but been powerless to stop her demons. Yet when detectives arrived at his door with a warrant in hand, the charm drained from his face. His arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No struggle, no dramatic protest, just the click of handcuffs and the low murmur of officers reading his rights. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. To them, Daniel had always been polite, even charming. But now they saw the hollow spaces in his performance, the edges of something much darker. In the sterile walls of the interrogation room, the facade collapsed further. Under harsh fluorescent lights, Daniel's rehearsed composure began to falter. He smirked, then grew defensive, then lashed out with sudden anger. "You don't understand," he snapped, fists tightening on the metal table. "She needed me. She was nothing without me." His words, meant as justification, only confirmed the picture the detectives were beginning to piece together. The questioning stretched for hours. Each time Daniel tried to pivot into charm, the detectives pushed back with evidence, bank withdrawals, phone records, fragments from Maya's journal, and finally, the necklace clutched in her hand. The sight of it seemed to unnerve him more than any accusation. His voice cracked, his carefully built armor fracturing into contradictions and half-truths. Outside that room, a larger narrative was unraveling. One by one, people from Daniel's past began to step forward. An ex-girlfriend described how he had once isolated her, too, controlling her finances and cutting her off from friends. A former colleague recalled his temper, explosive outbursts followed by manipulative apologies. The stories were chillingly similar, echoes of Maya's silent suffering. Each testimony added another brushstroke to the portrait of a predator, revealing patterns that stretched back years. What had once seemed like charm was now unmasked as calculation. His gifts and affection were never free. They came with invisible chains. His laughter, his touch, even his promises were weapons wrapped in velvet. The women who once believed they had found love eventually realized they had been caught in a cycle of fear and dependence. Maya had not been the first. The question lingering over the investigation was whether she had simply been the last. The media seized on these revelations, headlines screaming of "a double life" and "the monster behind closed doors." His smiling photos, once the image of a respectable man, now carried a sinister weight. Commentators spoke of love turned lethal, while survivors of similar abuse saw in Maya's story an echo of their own. For Priya, the pain deepened with each new revelation. She remembered Daniel's early visits, his soft-spoken charm, the way he had looked at Maya as though she were the only person in the world. Now those same memories twisted into horror, each gesture recast as a trap. "He fooled us all," she whispered, her grief laced with anger. "He fooled her most of all." As Daniel sat in his cell awaiting trial, stripped of his polished mask, the truth stood exposed. He was not a man who had simply lost control once. He was a man who had perfected control as a weapon. The cycle of manipulation, violence, and deceit had defined his relationships, and Maya had paid the ultimate price. But even as the portrait darkened, one haunting question remained. Would the court see him for who he truly was, or would his charm find one last audience to deceive? The stage was set for a reckoning. The courthouse buzzed with tension long before the trial began. Reporters crowded the marble steps, their cameras flashing as though light itself could uncover the truth. Inside, whispers echoed along the high wooden walls. It felt less like justice and more like theater. Every eye fixed on the man at the center of it all. Daniel. He entered in a crisp suit, as if costume could erase the stains of his past. His gaze swept across the room with remnants of his old charm, but there was no warmth in it, only calculation. He sat at the defense table, chin lifted, a portrait of confidence he no longer deserved. Across from him, Priya clutched Maya's journals. She had flown back from India, determined that her cousin's voice would not be buried with her. Her hands shook as she passed the leather-bound books to the prosecution, the weight of every unsent word pressing into her palms. The trial opened with the prosecution's story. A young woman, full of hope, ensnared by manipulation and control. They painted Maya's life in careful strokes, the move to a new town, the promises of love, the isolation that followed, and finally, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. Each detail cut through the silence of the courtroom like glass. Then came Maya's voice, resurrected from the pages of her journals. A recording of Priya reading aloud echoed through the chamber. I feel like I am disappearing piece by piece. His love feels like a cage, but I don't know how to leave without losing myself completely. The jurors shifted in their seats, some averting their eyes, others staring at Daniel as if willing him to break. But the defense struck back with venom. Daniel's lawyer leaned heavily on doubt, spinning narratives of jealousy, betrayal, and instability. He described Maya as fragile, a woman prone to exaggeration, perhaps even desperation. He suggested her journals were not evidence of truth, but dramatizations of a troubled mind. At times, he implied that her death had been her own choice. Daniel played his role well. He shed carefully timed tears, shaking his head as if heartbroken. He spoke of love, of devotion, of a woman he claimed he could not save. She was troubled, he said, his voice low, deliberate. I tried to help her. I gave everything I had. His words echoed through the courtroom, but for those who had seen behind the mask, they rang hollow. The prosecution countered with witnesses. Former partners stepped forward, their testimonies chilling in their similarity. Each described a man who began with affection, only to tighten his grip until escape seemed impossible. Their voices trembled as they recounted bruises, broken promises, and nights of fear. One woman stared Daniel down as she spoke, refusing to flinch under his gaze. Financial records followed, laying bare the trail of exploitation. Withdrawals from Maya's accounts, hotel receipts, and sudden transfers to Daniel's name. The jury studied the documents, their faces hardening. Piece by piece, the illusion unraveled. Still, the defense pushed its narrative. Is it not possible, the lawyer pressed, that Daniel was merely a flawed man in a flawed relationship? That jealousy, miscommunication, and emotional volatility clouded judgment on both sides? The suggestion hung heavy, daring the jury to find balance in the fog between love and cruelty. For Priya, every word was torture. She sat through the crossfire of narratives, her cousin's life dissected by strangers. Sometimes she closed her eyes, imagining Maya alive beside her, whispering the truth that could cut through all the noise. Other times, she fixed her stare on Daniel, determined not to let his charm sway a room again. The trial stretched on, day after day, until it felt like the town itself was on trial, its willingness as to believe charm over truth, appearances over scars. As closing arguments approached, the air thickened. The prosecutor rose, voice steady but charged. This is not about jealousy. This is not about a woman's fragility. This is about a predator who saw vulnerability and used it. This is about silence, manipulation, and the cost of ignoring the cries written in these pages. Maya cannot speak for herself, but today, her truth stands before you. The defense followed, softer in tone, but sharp in implication. "What we have here," the lawyer insisted, "is tragedy, not crime. A young woman lost to her own struggles, and a man now vilified for loving her. Do not let grief blind you to doubt. Justice demands certainty, not sympathy." The jury's faces remained unreadable as the gavel struck to end the day. Outside, cameras flashed, the world waiting for a verdict. Inside, silence hung heavy, broken only by Priya's quiet sobs as she clutched Maya's necklace in her hand. The truth had been spoken in fragments, love and betrayal, hope and terror, but whether justice would recognize it was another question entirely. And so, the town held its breath as the jury prepared to decide: victim or runaway, predator or partner, truth or myth. The reckoning was not over. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. Time seemed to suspend itself, the shuffle of feet, the creak of benches, the pounding of anxious hearts. Priya gripped the silver necklace in her palm so tightly it left an imprint, as though holding on to Maya in that small way might summon her back. When the foreman stood, the words came like a blade cutting through the room. "We find the defendant, Daniel Carter, guilty on all counts." The air shifted instantly. Relief, sobs, gasps, and even murmurs of disbelief. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens chasing history as it unfolded. Daniel's mask cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, fury flickering beneath the polished exterior. For once, his charm failed him. Priya wept quietly. The verdict was justice, but it did not erase the empty chair beside her, the laughter that would never return, the life cut short. No sentence could bring Maya back. The judge's words were measured, deliberate. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The courtroom reminded of the brutality and manipulation that had ended in tragedy. Each count was read aloud, stacking years upon years, a symbolic reminder of the weight of his crimes. But the echo of those sentences carried hollowness. Outside, the courthouse steps filled with reporters again. Headlines screamed about justice served, about the predator finally caged. Some painted Maya as a martyr of silence, others as a victim of her own vulnerability. The world had its narrative, but for those closest to her, the truth was less tidy. Priya spoke only once to the cameras, her voice soft but cutting. "This isn't just about my cousin. This is about how many women go unheard, how many cries are dismissed until it is too late. The verdict is justice, but it is not victory. The cost was her life." Her words carried across news broadcasts, resonating beyond the town. Activists cited Maya's story in campaigns against domestic violence, highlighting the red flags ignored, the system that hesitated, the silence society often demanded of women. Each retelling sparked outrage, but also sorrow. Back in Maya's apartment, her belongings sat like relics of an unfinished life. The journals, now preserved as evidence, returned to Priya. She placed them gently in a box with photographs and a shawl that still carried her cousin's faint perfume. The apartment was no longer a home. It was a crime scene frozen in memory, where hope had once bloomed and then withered. Daniel's conviction did not silence his defenders. Letters arrived to the courthouse, some claiming he was misunderstood, others insisting Maya was unstable. The same cycle of judgment that had haunted her in life continued after death, proving how cruelly society weaponized perception. Priya read Maya's last journal entry again, one written just days before her disappearance. "If something happens to me, let them know I tried to live. I wanted love, but not like this. I wanted freedom, but I was caged. Please let my story matter." Those words echoed louder than any verdict. They became a haunting refrain, pushing Priya to promise that Maya would not be forgotten. At the sentencing, Family and friends delivered tearful statements. One by one, they spoke of the girl who dreamed of painting, of traveling the world, of escaping her past only to meet a darker fate. Their voices trembled with grief, but also resolve, reminding the court that Maya was more than a case number. She had been a daughter, a cousin, a friend, and now a symbol of both survival and failure. When the gavel struck for the final time, there was closure. But it was incomplete. Justice had been delivered, yes. A predator was caged, yes. But the true cost lay in the silence that had allowed Daniel to thrive for so long, and in the empty seat beside Priya that would never be filled. As the courthouse emptied and the cameras turned away, a quiet truth lingered. Justice can punish the guilty, but it cannot mend the shattered pieces left behind. And in that silence, Maya's story lived on. An echo, a warning, a plea not to be ignored again. The courtroom doors had closed, the cameras turned elsewhere, and the world moved on to its next tragedy. Yet in the quiet that followed Daniel's sentencing, Maya's story continued to reverberate like a wound that refused to heal. On news broadcasts, her name lingered in scrolling headlines. Justice for Maya. The love that killed. Predator behind bars. To the public, she was now a symbol, a cautionary tale packaged into sensational fragments. But for those who had known her, the neighbors who remembered her gentle greetings, the friend who once shared late-night laughter, she was more than a headline. She was a woman whose hopes had been devoured by cruelty. The documentary's narration drew the thread tighter. Maya's story, it explained, was not unique. It was the reflection of a larger pattern, betrayal disguised as devotion, control masquerading as love, and silence that allowed violence to grow unchecked. Her life became a mirror for countless others trapped in invisible prisons, their cries muffled by fear or disbelief. Clips of her journals filled the screen, her words written in looping ink, fragile yet unflinching. I wanted to believe love could heal me. Instead, it broke me more than I thought possible. Each sentence was read aloud over dimly lit shots of her empty apartment, the cracked lamp still lying on the floor, the walls carrying echoes of arguments that would never be heard again. Priya's voice appeared near the end, not as a victim, but as a witness. Maya's story is not about how she died. It's about how she lived, and how she was failed. By him. By silence. By all of us who didn't see soon enough. Her words quivered but did not break, carrying both grief and resolve. The documentary paused on Daniel's face, no longer polished, no longer charming. Mugshot lighting stripped away the illusions he once wrapped himself in. He looked ordinary, even small, and that was the warning. Monsters don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they wear smiles, whisper promises, and hold your hand until you can't escape their grip. Yet the story did not end in despair. The narration shifted to the voices of survivors, women who reached out after Maya's case, who said her story gave them the courage to leave, to speak, to seek help. Her death had become a spark, a painful reminder that silence has a cost too heavy to bear. In the town square, a mural appeared weeks later. It showed Maya's face, eyes soft but unyielding, surrounded by colors she had once loved to paint with. Below, in bold letters, a line from her journal. Please, let my story matter. People left flowers, candles, handwritten notes. Strangers whispered her name as though keeping it alive could shield others from the same fate. The final moments of the documentary slowed, images dissolving into one another. Her laughter captured in an old video, the necklace found clutched in her hand, the courthouse steps where truth finally emerged. Over it all, the narrator's voice lingered. Maya's story is not just about betrayal or violence. It is about what happens when control replaces love, when fear replaces freedom, when silence becomes more dangerous than the truth. Her voice was nearly erased, But in telling her story, we refuse to let it vanish. The screen faded to black, leaving only her name. And though her life had ended by the river's edge, Maya endured. In whispers, in warnings, in every person who heard her story and vowed not to let silence win again.